The contract had 7 pages, a notary stamp in the bottom right corner, and one rule written in plain language at the top of page 3.
No romantic involvement.
Sign here if you agree. I signed it. I told myself it was the easiest thing I had ever agreed to in my life. That was the first lie I told inside that arrangement, and I told it to myself, which is always the worst kind. Her name was Sloane Mercer. I had known her the way you know people in a small city. Not well, not close, just enough to recognize her car in a parking lot and nod if we ended up at the same coffee counter. She worked in commercial real estate. I ran a mid-sized construction firm my father had built from nothing and handed to me with more debt than he ever mentioned out loud. We had crossed paths on 2 job sites, exchanged business cards once, and that was the full length of our history before she called me on a Tuesday night and asked if she could come by. I said yes because her voice on the phone sounded like someone holding themselves together with both hands. She showed up 20 minutes later in a gray coat with rain on the shoulders, a leather folder tucked under her arm, and that particular kind of composure that looks solid until you get close enough to see the cracks in it. I opened the door, and she walked straight to my kitchen table like she already knew that was where the conversation was going to happen. Sit down first, I said. She shook her head. If I sit down, I'll lose my nerve. So she stood, and she told me all of it right there with her coat still on and rain drying in her hair. Her grandfather had left an estate worth $500,000, split between her and her older cousin, a man named Porter, who had spent the last 8 years making sure every room he walked into understood that he was the smartest person in it. The will had a condition that nobody had told Sloane about until the week prior. Both heirs had to be married at the time of distribution. Porter had been married for 6 years. Sloane had been so focused on building her career that she had not come close. The distribution deadline was 90 days out. After that, her half reverted entirely to Porter, and Porter had already started acting like it already had. I stared at her for a long time. She pulled the folder open and slid a paper across the table.
It was a contract.
Her lawyer had drafted it. Clean terms, a flat payment to me for my time and the inconvenience, and one rule spelled out so there was no ambiguity about what this was supposed to be.
No romantic involvement.
Business arrangement only. Why me? I asked. She looked directly at me. Because you're the only person I can think of who won't make this into something it isn't. You're practical. You don't talk too much. And you need the money. That last part was blunt enough to sting, but she was not wrong. My firm had survived 2 bad quarters and a subcontractor who had walked off a project with $60,000 of my materials. I was not underwater, but I was not comfortable either. The amount she was offering me for 3 months of pretending would cover the breathing room I had been trying to manufacture for the better part of a year. I read the contract twice. Then I picked up a pen. She watched me sign it with an expression I could not read yet. I had not learned her face then. That came later. We married at the county clerk's office on a Thursday morning with 2 strangers as witnesses and a form that asked more questions about our parking than our feelings. Sloane wore a navy dress and flats, practical shoes for a practical day. I wore a pressed shirt with a collar that felt slightly too tight all morning. The clerk congratulated us in a voice that said she had done it 500 times this year. Sloane thanked her. I held the door. We had agreed she would move into my house for appearances. Her apartment was in a building where neighbors noticed things, and a wife who did not actually live with her husband was the kind of detail that lawyers looked for when they wanted to disqualify a marriage claim. She arrived with 4 boxes and 2 suitcases. I had cleaned the spare room and put fresh towels on the rack. She set her boxes down and stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at the walls the way people look at a place they are not sure they belong in. Guest bathroom is down the hall, I said. Wi-Fi password is on the router. Fridge is fair game. She nodded without looking at me. Thank you. You don't have to thank me every time, I said. That made her glance over.
Sorry.
Habit. The first week felt like 2 people trying to share a space without taking up any of it. She woke up early. I woke up earlier. We ate breakfast at opposite ends of the counter reading separate things. She worked from the dining room table. I went to the office and came back late. We were polite in a way that had nothing warm inside it. Just 2 people who had made a business decision and were trying to honor the terms. By the second week, small things started happening. She learned that I took my coffee black and started making a second cup without asking. I noticed she skipped dinner when she was stressed and started leaving something on the counter on nights I knew her calls had run long. Neither of us mentioned any of it. It just happened the way small habits happen when you share four walls with someone. The first real test came from Porter. He called Sloane on a Sunday afternoon while we were both in the house. I could hear her end of the conversation from the kitchen, one-word answers, increasingly clipped, and then silence that meant she had ended the call faster than she wanted to. She came into the kitchen and set her phone face down on the counter hard enough that I looked up.
He wants to meet, she said.
When? Tomorrow. Lunch. He said he wants to introduce his wife to mine. The way she said it made it obvious Porter had not said it that nicely. I closed my laptop. Where? She looked at me. You don't have to come. If your cousin is testing whether this is real, I should be there. She studied my face for a second, like she was checking whether I meant it or whether I was just being efficient about the terms of the contract. I meant it. I just did not examine too closely why I meant it. Porter Mercer was exactly what you would expect from his name. Cufflinks on a Tuesday, handshake that lasted 1 second too long, a smile that did not reach far enough up his face to seem genuine. His wife, Diane, was quiet and pleasant in the way of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. I noticed that immediately. I noticed Sloane noticed it too. We sat across from them at a restaurant Porter had chosen, which meant it was expensive and slightly inconvenient for everyone except Porter. He spent the first 10 minutes asking questions that were shaped like small talk, but were actually measurements. How long had we known each other before this? Where the wedding was held? Whether we had taken time off for a honeymoon? Each question landed with a little weight behind it, like he was pressing on something to see if it was hollow. Sloane answered cleanly. Not over-explaining, not nervous. I gave short, honest answers and let her carry more of it because I could tell she had rehearsed this in her head already and I did not want to interrupt her rhythm. Then Porter turned to me directly and said, "You're in construction?" "My family's firm, yes." "Interesting." He tilted his head. "Sloane never mentioned you before the wedding." "People don't announce everything," I said. "No," he smiled. "They don't." He looked at Sloane. "You seem different."
How?
"Less alone," he said, and it came out mean instead of kind, which I think was the intention. Sloane set her water glass down. "So do you, Porter." "Must be the cufflinks." Diane looked at her plate. I looked straight at Porter and kept my face neutral, which seemed to bother him more than anything else I could have done. On the drive home, Sloane sat with her head back against the seat and her eyes on the passing streetlights. She did not say anything for 3 blocks. Then she said, "He's going to keep pushing." "I know. He'll look for inconsistencies. We won't give him any." She turned her head slightly. "You're surprisingly calm about all of this." "One problem at a time," I said. "That's the only way anything gets done." She looked back at the window. "I think that might be the most useful thing anyone has said to me in 6 months." The days started folding into each other. She was good at what she did. I understood that fast. She had a way of reading a room and knowing exactly how much to say and when to say nothing. In meetings she dragged me into for the sake of appearances, she moved between confident and approachable so smoothly that people walked away thinking she had listened to them when she had actually redirected the entire conversation. I watched her do it 4 times before I said anything. We were driving back from a dinner with her firm's partners when I said, "You do that thing where you let people think they made the decision." She glanced at me. "What thing?" "You redirect. Then you pause just long enough for them to feel like they got there themselves." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Most people don't notice that." "I watch how things get built," I said. "Rooms, conversations, same idea." She looked at the road ahead. "My ex-husband said I was manipulative. Is he wrong?" She thought about it honestly, which I respected. He wasn't entirely wrong. I just think there's a difference between being strategic and being dishonest. I don't say things I don't mean. I nodded. "That's fair. Do you think it's wrong?"
"No," I said.
"I think you learned to work with what you had in rooms that weren't built for you." She did not respond for a long time after that. When we pulled into the driveway, she sat in the passenger seat for a moment before opening the door. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, That might be the most accurately anyone has described me in a long time. I did not make a big thing of it. I got out of the car and went inside. But I stayed at the kitchen sink longer than I needed to, looking at my own hands under the running water and telling myself I was just getting good at reading a business partner. That was the second lie. The situation with Porter escalated on a Wednesday. He had hired someone. Not a private investigator exactly, but close enough. A contact inside the county clerk's office who had been asked to confirm whether our marriage certificate listed any anomalies. Sloane found out through her own lawyer, who had a contact of his own. She came home that evening with her jaw set and her folder under her arm, and a look on her face that meant the quiet war had moved into a new phase. "He's trying to prove it isn't real," she said. I knew that. What did he find? Nothing yet, because there isn't anything to find. She dropped into a chair at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the wood. But that won't stop him from looking. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. What do we need? She looked at me. Evidence of an actual life. Shared accounts, documentation of shared expenses, photos that don't look staged, people who can speak to having seen us together in ordinary situations. Not just business dinners and signed forms. Real things. I thought about it for a moment. My crew lead has known me since I was 22. He'd talk to anyone about anything if I asked him to. That helps.
She pulled out a notepad.
I have a friend named Kara who has been asking to have dinner with both of us since the first week. I've been avoiding it because it felt like using her. It is using her a little. Sloane looked up sharply. But she gets a dinner with you, I said. That's not nothing. That almost made her smile. The corner of her mouth moved, and then she caught it. We started building the record. Dinner at Kara's house, where I sat beside Sloane at a loud, crowded table and learned that she laughed differently when she was genuinely off guard. Quicker, more open, less managed. I had heard her polished laugh in business settings, the one that was warm but controlled. This one was neither. It just happened. Kara looked at me across the table once, and I had to look away first. Shared account opened at the local credit union where I paid attention to what she bought without meaning to. A set of architectural drawing books. Good cheese. Expensive hand cream she had been stretching the end of a tube to avoid buying. I did not mention any of it. A project site visit that she came to on a Friday afternoon because my foreman had met her once and said she was interesting, and she had said she wanted to see how the framing on the south wall was coming. She stood in hard hat and borrowed boots looking at my blueprints and asking 3 questions in a row that told me she understood load-bearing structures better than most of the clients I dealt with. Where did you learn that? I asked. Architecture program. 1 semester. She handed me back the plans. I switched to business because my grandfather said architecture was a talent and business was a skill, and a talent without a skill underneath it doesn't pay for itself. Sounds like something he'd put in a will with conditions attached. She looked at me sideways.
Yeah.
Sounds exactly like him. We drove back in comfortable silence, and I noticed that the silence between us had changed. It was not the careful silence of the first week anymore. It had loosened into something that felt less like 2 people avoiding each other and more like 2 people who did not need to fill every space. I noticed when that happened. I did not say so. The thing about rules is that they work best when both people inside an arrangement are still strangers to each other. Rules exist to prevent things that are still theoretical. When the theoretical starts becoming real, a rule starts feeling less like a boundary and more like a wall you have to keep reminding yourself is there. I started reminding myself more. I started noticing more too, which was the problem. The way she held a pen against her lip when she was reading something difficult. The way she said my name when she was tired, shorter, softer than when she was in professional mode. The fact that she always knew exactly when I had skipped lunch without my saying so. The way she argued, cleanly and without cruelty, never trying to make me feel small even when she was sure she was right. I had known her 11 weeks at that point. I knew her face when she was worried and her voice when she was hiding it. I knew she made coffee too strong and apologized for it every time like it was a personal failure. I knew she had not spoken to her mother in 2 years over something neither of them had fully said out loud yet. I knew she got up at 2 in the morning sometimes and sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes before going back to bed, and that she never explained it, and I never asked. That was when I understood I was in trouble. The moment I knew for certain was a Saturday in the 6th week. We had a planned appearance at a charity event downtown that Porter was also attending. We had dressed separately, met in the front room, and I had looked at her in a dark green dress with her hair pulled back and felt something move inside my chest so plainly that I had to pick up my keys off the counter just to have something to do with my hands. At the event, we stayed close the way we had agreed, close enough to look real, without looking performed. She introduced me to people easily, no hesitation, no over-explanation. I kept one hand at the small of her back during introductions, which had been her idea early on and had started as a simple logistical thing, and now felt like something else entirely every time I did it. Porter found us near the bar. He brought 2 people with him, a couple who turned out to be old friends of Sloane's grandfather. The kind of people who knew both heirs from childhood, and whose opinion of this marriage would carry real weight with the estate attorney. Porter had planned it. I could see that immediately. He had arranged the encounter. He introduced us, made pleasant small talk, and then very smoothly brought up the wedding. Such a short engagement, he said to the couple, who looked kind but attentive. I always said Sloane would do everything on her own timeline. She's the smartest person I know, I said. Timing her has always been a losing game. Porter's smile held, but his eyes changed. The older woman, Margaret, looked at me warmly. You seem very sure of her. Hard not to be when you're standing next to her every day, I said. Sloane went very still beside me. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would catch. But I felt it through the small contact between my hand and her back. A shift. Something she was doing with her breathing. Margaret said something to Porter that I did not fully catch, and his jaw tightened, and then the conversation moved on, and eventually they drifted to another part of the room. Sloane waited until they were out of earshot, and then she turned to me. Not angry. Something harder to name than angry. You didn't have to say that.
No, I said.
I know. She looked at me for a moment.
Cole.
I met her eyes. She looked away first. We drove home without talking. Not the comfortable silence of the last few weeks. Something heavier than that. When we got inside, she set her bag on the table and stood with her back to me for a moment. I waited. Finally, she turned around. We have a rule. I know. She looked at me steadily. I wrote it because I needed it to be true. I can't afford to let this become something it isn't while there's still this much at stake. If it falls apart, if we fall apart, I lose everything we've built for the last 6 weeks, and I possibly lose the estate and Porter wins. She pressed both hands together in front of her. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood exactly what she was saying. I also understood that she was saying it in a way that told me she needed the rule as much as she needed me to hold it. I leaned against the doorframe. You're right. She let out a breath. We still have a job to finish, I said. Let's finish it. She nodded, but she did not quite meet my eyes, and I did not push it. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. Not angry. Not even sad exactly. Just holding something I had not expected to be holding, trying to figure out what to do with the weight of it. The answer was the same one I always came back to. One problem at a time. 90 days. See it through.
I was good at that.
I was less good at not thinking about her face in the car on the way home and the fact that she had looked away first. The final meeting with the estate attorney came on a Thursday morning in a building downtown with an elevator that was too slow and hallway carpet that was too dark. Sloane and I sat side by side across from the attorney, a careful man named Whitfield who had probably seen every version of this situation and was not going to be impressed by anything we brought in. Porter sat to our left with his lawyer beside him. Diane was not there. I noticed that. I think Sloane did too. Porter had filed a formal challenge 2 weeks earlier. His argument was what you would expect. Rushed marriage, convenient timing, insufficient evidence of a genuine union. His lawyer had prepared documentation. Witness statements from a few people who had said they were surprised by the marriage. A timeline meant to suggest the whole thing had been constructed. Whitfield reviewed everything with the same unreadable expression the entire time. Then he looked at us. I'd like to hear from both parties directly, he said. Porter went first. It was polished. He talked about family responsibility and his grandfather's intentions and the importance of honoring the spirit of the conditions. He was very good at sounding concerned when what he was actually doing was calculating. Then Sloane opened her folder. She did not sound polished. She sounded like herself, which was better. She walked Whitfield through 6 weeks of shared life with a kind of specific detail that nobody manufactures. The credit union statements. The site visit photos my foreman had taken without being asked. A note from Kara, handwritten, describing the dinner and what she had observed. Statements from 2 neighbors, the pharmacy, where we both filled prescriptions under the same insurance, the grocery store loyalty account that had both our names on it by the 4th week. She was thorough, without being performative. She answered Whitfield's questions directly and admitted what she didn't know, which was the thing that most convinced me she had learned it somewhere real. People who are building a story don't admit gaps. Porter leaned forward at one point. I'd like to ask a question. Whitfield nodded.
Porter looked at me. Cole.
What was the first thing you noticed about her? It was a trap. He wanted something vague. Something that sounded rehearsed. Something he could point at and say, see, they prepared for this. I looked at him. Then I looked at Sloane for 1 second, and she looked back at me with that face she used when she was trying to stay composed and almost managing it. I turned back to Porter. She holds a pen against her lip when she's reading something she doesn't want to be true yet. She does it without knowing. I noticed it the first week. The room went very quiet.
Porter blinked.
Whitfield made a small note. Sloane did not move. Porter tried once more after that. A procedural question about the timing of the marriage relative to when Sloane had learned about the condition. But Whitfield's body language had shifted, and Porter's lawyer put a hand briefly on his client's arm, which was a lawyer's way of saying stop talking. Whitfield gathered his papers. I'll have a formal determination in 10 days, he said. But based on what I've reviewed today, I have no basis to challenge the validity of this marriage or Mrs. Mercer's standing as a rightful heir. He looked at Porter steadily. I'd encourage you to let the estate proceed as written. Porter stood and left without speaking to us. His lawyer followed more slowly. When the door closed, Sloane sat still for a moment with both hands flat on the table. Then she exhaled all at once like she had been holding her breath for 6 weeks straight. We walked out into the hallway and then out of the building into cold gray afternoon light. There was a food cart on the corner and traffic going by, and people with their heads down moving in every direction. Normal afternoon in a city that had no idea what we had just been through in that office. Sloane stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky once. Then she looked at me.
It's done, she said. Looks that way.
She nodded slowly. So the 90 days are up. I counted in my head.
Yes.
She looked at me then in that particular way she had when she was about to say something honest and was not sure she should. I had learned to recognize it. The slight stillness before the words came. The contract ends when the distribution clears, she said. Probably 2 more weeks. Then you get your payment and we figure out whatever comes next. She said it carefully, neutrally, like she was presenting options. I looked at her on that sidewalk with the cold air moving between us and 6 weeks of shared mornings and long evenings, and one rule I had broken somewhere in the middle of all of it, quietly, without ceremony, the way most real things happen. I have one question, I said. She waited. When you wrote that rule, I said, was it just about protecting the arrangement? She looked down at the sidewalk, then back up at me. No, she said. It was about protecting me. I nodded. Then I said, I broke it. She held my gaze. I know. The wind moved between us. A cab blew its horn somewhere down the block. How long? She asked quietly. I thought about it honestly. Week 4. Maybe earlier. Hard to say, when you're not looking for it. Her mouth pressed together for a moment. I thought I had more time before you'd say it out loud. You said I was the most practical person you knew. She laughed once. A real one. The unguarded kind. And then she looked at me with something open in her face that I had only caught in fragments before, late at night at the kitchen table, on a job site in borrowed boots, in the front seat of my truck on the way home from a dinner that had stopped feeling like an assignment weeks ago. I think I broke it in week 3, she said. I'm just better at not showing it. That hit me somewhere under the ribs. I took 1 step toward her, and she did not move back.
The deal is done, I said.
The rule doesn't protect anything anymore. She looked up at me steadily. Then what does it protect? Nothing, I said. That's the point. She stood there on that sidewalk for a long moment, looking at me the way she had looked at Whitfield's documents, like she was checking whether the thing in front of her was solid or whether it would give way under pressure. Then she said, I'm not signing a new contract. Good, I said. Neither am I. She closed the space between us, and I did not hesitate for a single second. Not there on a city sidewalk in the middle of an ordinary Thursday afternoon with no audience and no performance and nothing between us, except 6 weeks of something we had both been careful not to name until the work was done, and the rule had nothing left to guard. She pulled back after a moment and looked at me with the full weight of that composed face finally down. Just her. Not the version managing things. Just Sloane. You're terrible at pretending things don't matter, she said. You're better at it than you should be. She shook her head once, almost to herself. My grandfather would have hated you. I thought about it. Rich man, controlled everything, wrote conditions into his will. He'd have thought you were too direct. Good, I said. Direct is the only thing I know how to be. She looked at me for another moment. Then she slid her hand into mine on that sidewalk like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and she had just been waiting until the contract couldn't stop her. We walked back toward my truck, both of us quiet in the way that had nothing hollow in it anymore. The city moved around us. The estate would distribute in 2 weeks. Porter would lose his challenge and probably spend the next 3 months making sure nobody knew he had lost it. Whitfield would stamp the final papers. The credit union account would stay open. The guest room at the end of my hall would probably stay empty. None of that felt like the end of anything. It felt like the first week of something neither of us had signed a document for. No terms, no timeline, no rule at the top of page 3 telling us what to keep out of it. Just 2 people who had spent 90 days learning each other so thoroughly that somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them looking for it, the arrangement had quietly become the realest thing either of them had. I had signed a contract that said never fall in love. I broke the rule in week 4. Maybe week 3. Hard to say, when you're not looking for it. And standing there on that sidewalk with her hand in mine, and the city going by like nothing had changed, I was not sorry about a single word of it.